Behind every face lies a force, not loud or towering but steady, precise, and unyielding. He was small in stature, quiet in voice, yet vast in intellect. A man whose pen built the very architecture of a nation's law. This is the story of James Madison, the fourth President of the United States and the father of the Constitution. Born in 1751 in the rolling countryside of Orange County, Virginia, Madison was raised among tobacco fields and tradition. But from the earliest days, his strength came not from land or lineage but from thought. Prone to illness and introspection, he read voraciously, absorbing languages, philosophy, law, and history. While others commanded with presence, Madison shaped power through principle. By the time he reached Princeton, finishing a 4-year course in 2, his mind had become one of the sharpest in the colonies. He was not destined to lead on horseback or in the roar of crowds. He would lead in silence at the desk in rooms filled with books, ideas, and ink. As revolution approached, Madison did not hesitate. He joined Virginia's Committee of Safety, helped draft the state's constitution, and served alongside Thomas Jefferson. But it was not until the chaos after independence that Madison found his true calling. The Articles of Confederation were crumbling. The states were fracturing. The young republic was at risk of collapsing under its own weight. And Madison knew, America needed more than freedom, it needed structure. In the sweltering summer of 1787, delegates gathered in Philadelphia. What followed was not just debate, it was invention. And in the heart of it all was Madison. Soft-spoken, pale, often overlooked, yet always listening, always calculating. He arrived with a plan, the Virginia Plan. A blueprint for a new federal government. One balanced by checks and guided by law. Madison spoke less than some, but when he did, others paused. His ideas flowed not from ambition but from conviction. He believed in a strong yet limited government. In representation rooted in the people. In the separation of powers to prevent tyranny. He took meticulous notes that would become the only complete record of the Constitutional Convention. When the Constitution was drafted, the battle was far from over. The states were divided, fearful, suspicious of centralized power. So Madison, joined by Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, took up his pen once more. In a series of essays known as the Federalist Papers, Madison made the case for the Constitution, not through passion but precision. Essay by essay he explained the importance of compromise, the danger of factions, the necessity of a strong yet accountable government. Federalist No. 10, his most famous, remains one of the clearest defenses of Republican democracy ever written. But even as the Constitution was ratified, Madison understood its flaws. He had once opposed a Bill of Rights, fearing it might limit liberties by listing them. But when the people demanded guarantees, Madison listened. In 1789, now a member of the First Congress, he proposed a series of amendments, 10 of which would become the Bill of Rights. He gave the people both structure and shield. Let me know when you're ready for me to continue from this point, and I will proceed without ending the story. Now serving as a congressman, James Madison continued to shape the identity of the young republic, not through grand speeches or commanding gestures, but with meticulous lawmaking and unwavering dedication to principle. He was a master of persuasion through logic, a statesman who knew that true governance was built not on charisma, but on coherence. Yet politics was shifting. Alliances fractured. The Federalist Party, once aligned with many of his ideals, grew closer to centralized power, high finance, and British sympathies. Madison, alongside his longtime friend Thomas Jefferson, recoiled. Together, they formed the Democratic-Republican Party, advocating for limited government, agrarian values, and a strict interpretation of the Constitution they had helped create. By the end of the century, Madison stood again in the national spotlight, this time as Secretary of State under President Jefferson. In this role, he guided foreign policy during one of the most turbulent eras in global history. The Napoleonic Wars raged across Europe, dragging neutral nations like the United States into their economic crossfire. British ships seized American sailors. French policies disrupted trade. Diplomacy walked a razor's edge. Madison believed in peace through principle, but the world believed in power through force. When Jefferson stepped down, the presidency passed quietly into Madison's hands. On March 4, 1809, he became the fourth President of the United States, a scholar turned executive, tasked with preserving a fragile experiment now tested by foreign aggression and internal division. He inherited a nation unsure of itself. Federalists attacked from the sidelines. British ships hovered menacingly off the coast. Western settlers demanded action. And in the background, whispers of war grew louder. Madison, cautious by nature and steeped in Enlightenment reason, hesitated. He exhausted every diplomatic channel. He imposed embargoes. He appealed to Congress and conscience alike. But by 1812, with no peaceful path remaining, James Madison made the decision that would define his presidency. He asked Congress to declare war on Great Britain. It was a gamble. America's military was unprepared, its finances unstable, its people divided. But Madison believed that national honor, once violated, could not be ignored. The War of 1812, often called the Second War of Independence, would test not only the young republic but the quiet man who led it. The War of 1812 unfolded not as a march to glory, but as a struggle for survival. Battles were won and lost. Frontiers blazed with conflict. The seas swelled with privateers and warships. Madison, never a military man, found himself at the helm of a war that shook every foundation he had helped build. In August 1814, the unthinkable happened. British forces invaded the capital. Washington, D.C., the city Madison had helped design, burned. The Capitol, the Treasury, and the President's house were set ablaze. Madison and his wife, Dolly, fled just ahead of the flames. But even in retreat, he refused to surrender authority. In the fields outside the Capitol, under a makeshift tent, Madison became the first and only sitting U.S. president to come under direct enemy fire. Yet out of the ashes something stirred. As the British turned their sights on Baltimore, American resistance stiffened. At Fort McHenry, under bombs and rockets, the flag still flew. Francis Scott Key wrote his poem. A spirit, national, stubborn, defiant, rose with the smoke. By 1815 the war ended. No territory had changed hands. No clear victor declared. But the message was unmistakable. The United States had stood its ground. The Republic had endured. And James Madison, whose critics once called him too timid to lead, emerged tempered by crisis. His final years in office were marked not by conquest, but by construction. He oversaw the creation of the Second Bank of the United States, supported internal improvements and attempted, once again, to bridge the divide between federal authority and local autonomy. Ever the constitutionalist, he walked a narrow line between ideology and necessity. But perhaps his greatest strength was in knowing when to let go. In 1817, after 2 terms marked by conflict and quiet resilience, Madison stepped away from power and returned to Montpelier, his Virginia estate nestled in green hills and silence. There, surrounded by books, letters, and the quiet hum of fields, he did not retire from thought. He wrote. He advised. He reflected. Visitors came from across the country to sit with the man who had shaped their Constitution, their war, and their peace. And in each conversation, Madison remained what he had always been, a philosopher of the Republic. And so at Montpelier, James Madison lived not in grandeur, but in reflection. He walked among the same trees he had known as a boy, though now they shaded the figure of a man who had shaped the very system under which the nation governed itself. His health declined slowly. His voice, once soft, grew fainter. But his mind remained sharp, clear, disciplined. Until the end he debated the Constitution, still defending its checks, still worrying about its misuse. He watched as new factions emerged, as his former protégés turned into ideological opponents, as the country expanded westward into territories he had only seen on hand-drawn maps. Slavery, an institution he had once tolerated as a political necessity, became an inescapable moral crisis. Privately, he mourned the failure to resolve it, knowing it would haunt the nation long after his passing. And yet, Madison never gave up on the Republic. He believed in its capacity for self-correction, for learning from its failures. He believed, as he had written so long ago, that liberty could only survive if power was controlled, by structure, by law, and by the will of an informed people. On June 28, 1836, James Madison breathed his last. There was no crowd, no cannon salute. Just the quiet closing of a life that had rarely demanded attention, but had always deserved it. He was the last of the Founding Fathers. The final architect of a generation that had not only dreamed a nation but built it. Madison left behind no memoir, no sweeping autobiography. His legacy was not in what he declared but in what he designed. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the principles of ordered liberty, all bore his fingerprints. Today he is less mythologized than Washington, less quoted than Jefferson. But his influence lives in every balance of power, in every civil right protected, in every peaceful transfer of leadership. Madison showed that true greatness does not need a spotlight. It needs only purpose, persistence, and the courage to put ideas before ego. He was the smallest of the founders and yet, in many ways, the most foundational. This was James Madison, the quiet architect of American government, the guardian of liberty, the fourth President of the United States, and the face behind the framework